Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons Narrative Midnight. So, I am, man. I'm starting to get an understanding of where we're at. I'll tell you right now, if you're a Dungeon Master, your head has been spinning in 2023. We have never seen a year like this in the history of Dungeons & Dragons. Never have we had a year like this. Let's count it off. Year starts off with an absolute firestorm. January 2023, Manic Panic. January 2023, OGL Crisis. People get very upset with Hasbro. People get very upset with Dungeons & Dragons. To the point where they literally try to destroy it forever. Like, literally, D&D be gone, burn it. Like, people literally, like, saying, destroy your digital books. Like, digital book burning. Like, it was bad, right? Then all that gets washed away with the second Dungeons & Dragons American blockbuster attempt, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. Real Hollywood shows up to embrace Dungeons & Dragons for realsies, right? And there's a global press of Dungeons & Dragons to the world. There's a global marketing. Global marketing of Dungeons & Dragons to the entire globe, right? So if D&D wasn't, the most famous tabletop role-playing game in the world already, it certainly was now, right? It was already. That wasn't even debatable. So D&D Honor Among Thieves comes and puts a times 2, times 3, times 5, times 10, right? The only question is how much its popularity was multiplied, and instantly, all of the agita that had come in January 2023 washes away in a wave of goodwill for Dungeons & Dragons, right? Then, right, that happens in March of 2023. Then, in July of 2023, we land in the American Narrative Midnight. Unprecedented. It's never been seen before. There was an event like it 60 years ago, but I actually think what's happening right now, the Hollywood shutdown, the SAG after strike, shut down all of Hollywood. Literally shut Hollywood down, right? Like, not just every big and small screen production, Hollywood production, but literally the movies in flight could not be talked about, right? Barbenheimer is happening in silence, right? Where people cannot even talk about these Oscar contender films, and Margot Robbie cannot say a word, right? It's astounding, right? So, Manic Panic to American Blockbuster to Narrative Midnight, right? And that is literally 7 months of the year. Like, we're not even through the year. It is absolutely astoundingly incredible what has actually happened, in 2023, right? So, where we are going right now is Dungeons & Dragons Narrative Midnight, okay? It is a period of time in Dungeons & Dragons where what a Dungeon Master needs to do changes massively, right? Like, literally the entirety of what Dungeons & Dragons is simply changes forever, right? And what is being called for by of every Dungeon Master changes dramatically, right? So before Dungeons & Dragons was before Dungeons & Dragons Narrative Midnight, which started in July of 2023, what Dungeons & Dragons was specifically was a game for pedantic academics, right? Thousands of pages of rules, nerd stuff the accusation of nerd stuff was there since 1974 and never stopped. Now, the reality is, Dungeons & Dragons, it never was nerd stuff, and that was completely wrong proposition. It was a wrong understanding, right? It's always been pedantic academics. It's never been nerds, and there's a very distinct difference between those things. Where we are today has dramatically changed, right? Joe Manganiello, right? That dude looks better than you, has bigger muscles than you, and is married to Sofia Vergara. If you look at Joe Manganiello, the idea that nerds are the only people playing Dungeons and Dragons is immediately proven wrong, right? Like, objectively, right? Like, you know, Joe Manganiello is not a nerd, right? Like, you know, I just said it, right? Like, you know, he has proven non-nerd status, right? Right? He's not a nerdy $dollar sign actor, and frankly, the people claiming to be that were never that, right? It's been a misnomer. It's been a misunderstanding from the beginning, right? So where are we now? We now arrive in Dungeons & Dragons Narrative Midnight, okay? It's where the story shuts down in America. Stories are not available in America. There's no source for them, okay? So essentially, and you're like, well, what about video games? Video games never told decent stories, right? Like, they brag about not telling stories. We recently got a $1 billion film from the creator of Super Mario, and he said flat out, we don't tell stories with this. This is about activity. It's not about stories, right? You know, so video games have never been a source for real story, and the reason why is they will sacrifice narrative for activity. They're an activity, right? They put you as a player through activity. They're not connected in any way to story. They don't respect the value of narrative. They don't deliver narrative, right? Video games have never been a source of narrative, okay? All right. So we are now in D&D Narrative Midnight, where we are running Dungeons & Dragons in the darkest time in American history for narrative, right? There are no new stories coming out, right? So it's shut down, right? And you're like, oh, well, what about authors? Nobody reads anymore. Please. Thanks. Next. All right? Like, please. All right? That stopped 10 years ago. Like, the death of print's been talked about for 20 years, right? We're in it, right? We are in Narrative Midnight. So what that means is now every single dungeon master out here needs to get ready to run Dungeons & Dragons for people who are not pedantic academics. So if we're going to run Dungeons & Dragons for a welder, if we're going to run Dungeons & Dragons for a farmer, if we're going to run Dungeons & Dragons for, you know, a dude who goes to a bar at 1 a.m. and doesn't come home alone, or a woman who goes to a bar at 1 a.m. and doesn't go home alone, this is different, right? Like, we are in a new space, a truly new space, right? So once we arrive here, we need to transform Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I think Gary Gygax knew this. He knew where we were coming, right? And his legacy has carried the provisioning of the Dungeon Master to change Dungeons & Dragons since 1974. So right now, every Dungeon Master in the world needs to become a Narrative Midnight Dungeon Master, right? We need to become the Shadow Dungeon Master. Someone who can run Dungeons & Dragons for non-pedantic academics, right? And that means speed. Our stories in Dungeons & Dragons needs to absolutely match the shockingly fast pace of actual television, which used to be available and is now going to be gone. It's gone right now. It's gone right now. All you will find is rotten fruit. That is all that is available. Hollywood has slammed the door on fresh fruit, right? The narrative fruit is only rotten. Only rotten. Don't eat it, right? So, you know, we want to, and so we right now need to provide fresh narrative fruit. And that means we have to run Dungeons & Dragons so fast it will shock pedantic, non-pedantic, non-academics, real people, right? And so it's this truly incredible, really important new, it's a new dramatic change, and we really need to deliver something fresh and real and powerful. And the first thing, and we're fully provisioned to do it right now. So we keep our PHP, we keep our DMG, we keep our monster manual. We need all of them. And what really needs to happen is we have to immediately kill the hit point, right? And the reason why is the bag of beans, hit the sack, 4 beans fall out. Hit the sack, 21 beans fall out. That's got to die, right? You hit a character, it's either it either parries, it's either wounded, or it's dead. Right? No more hit points, because we have to run these incredibly fast, right? And so we need to keep every class, we need to keep every species, but you need to be able to communicate every class and every species. Every class, 3 powers. 1 more power per level, okay? Every species, 3 actual mechanical benefits. And we have to rewrite every species, every class. We have to do it immediately, and we have to be ready to receive the wave of real people who will be arriving. And this is Dungeons & Dragons Narrative Midnight. And we've been prepared for it, and we've been provisioned for it by Gary Gygax, by Lorraine Williams, by Robert Hainsue, by Michael Merles, and right now by Jeremy Crawford. We've always had our heroes. We always had the people who would carry us through, right? And right now, Narrative Midnight starts immediately. We need to do it right now, right? So, welcome to Dungeons & Dragons Narrative Midnight. It is a dark time. I do not see you. I see a dark silhouette where very little light is behind you. I sense where you are. Do you sense where I am?